Let's start with Wolfenstein: The New Order. Wolfenstein is an interesting series with a unique history. The original game helped lay the foundation for first-person shooters, yet it faded into the background as titles like Doom, Quake, and Half-Life took the genre to new heights. Despite this, Wolfenstein remains solid and polished, especially during its gunfights, which are nothing short of magnificent, fluid, and challenging. The boss fights also bring a classic, old-school feel, offering well-designed encounters that sometimes require you to rely on audio cues and clues if you get stuck. It's a game that tests your skills while delivering a nostalgic nod to early FPS design. I genuinely loved Wolfenstein: The New Order, one of the best single-player campaigns of the last decade. It's a game that balances bombastic action with a surprisingly human story. If you missed it because you thought it was just another generic shooter, you'll be pleasantly surprised by its depth. Deus Ex: Human Revolution stays true to its roots as a first-person RPG stealth game, offering the kind of freedom that allows players to tailor the experience to their preferred playstyle. For a multi-platform game, it does an exceptional job of recreating the classic Deus Ex atmosphere, and I couldn't be more satisfied with how it turned out. The game remains faithful to the original in all the ways that matter most, while addressing and improving some of the series' previous weak points. The cover system makes stealth not only possible, but genuinely fun, and the melee takedown mechanics feel balanced and satisfying. While Human Revolution does improve on nearly every aspect of gameplay, it doesn't quite capture the same narrative magic that made Deus Ex 1's story so compelling. But the fact that this game exists at all and does such a great job of being a Deus Ex title is a small miracle. It's one of those games that you'll either love for its depth and world building or find a bit too slow-paced and dense. If you're a fan of solo play and games that challenge you to think before acting, it's a rewarding experience and definitely worth your time. If you have played Darksiders 3, chances are you've already experienced the first two games in the series. Like Darksiders 2, this entry changes things up a bit, and while it succeeds in some areas, it falls short in others. Instead of sticking to the hack-and-slash formula of the earlier games, Darksiders 3 takes a page out of the Dark Souls playbook. Combat is more deliberate, focusing heavily on dodging and timing your attacks rather than relying on combo spamming. I get why some fans of the series might not enjoy this shift. It's very different from the first two games and does miss a few key elements that made them great. However, Darksiders 3 is still a solid action game. It may not hit the same heights as its predecessors, but if you're into challenging combat and exploration, there's plenty of fun to be had. In a time where we're drowning in a sea of mediocre, hollow games, every so often one comes along that reminds you why you love gaming in the first place. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is one of those games. It's essentially an action team leadership simulator, and it's surprisingly fun in how it plays. The game is visually stunning, offering a variety of cool-looking planets and landscapes to explore, and I love that it's linear rather than trying to force itself into the overcrowded open-world formula. Performance-wise, it ran great for me, with only a few minor bugs here and there. In terms of combat, it's not overly complex, but remains fun throughout. You use Star-Lord's blasters, which have different elemental abilities, and you command the other Guardians, each with their own unique skills, making battles feel dynamic. It's also one of the most cinematic games I've ever played. What really took me by surprise, though, was how much I enjoyed the story. It feels personal and compelling, and the constant banter between the Guardians adds a layer of charm that keeps the experience fun from start to finish. In most games, we get a sense of achievement from slaying powerful monsters, uncovering hidden treasures, experiencing epic storylines, and saving characters we care about. Death Stranding, however, flips that on its head. When it launched, it garnered a lot of attention, but its divisive gameplay turned some players off. It's a game that rewards patience and immersion, and for those expecting non-stop action, it might feel slow or even dull. Because of this, it didn't quite reach the broad appeal other AAA titles usually enjoy. The walking simulator label stuck, which really undersells its depth and narrative. At its core, Death Stranding defies easy classification. It's more than just a game. It's a meditative journey that explores themes of connection, isolation, and perseverance. Planning your routes and deciding what tools to bring along are surprisingly satisfying. Traversing mountains, rivers, and rough terrain while avoiding danger feels genuinely rewarding. It's one of the few games that truly makes you appreciate its open world. Unlike many games that rely on fast travel to make things easier, Death Stranding remains consistent, offering a sense of continuity that's rare in open-world games. It's not for everyone, but if you enjoy games that take risks and offer something genuinely unique, this might just be a standout experience for you. Red Faction Guerrilla is the third entry in the Red Faction series, and it's all about chaos, destruction, and rebellion. Set on a semi-open world Mars, you play as a rebel fighting to free the planet from the authoritarian Earth Defense Force. While the story is serviceable and the world is fairly unique, the real highlight here is the destruction. Almost everything around you can be blown up or torn down: buildings, watchtowers, outposts, you name it. Whether you're smashing through walls with a sledgehammer, using explosives, or driving a vehicle straight into a structure, the game delivers a level of environmental destruction that still hasn't been topped. The destruction is chaotic and satisfying, with buildings collapsing in a surprisingly realistic way when you take out their key supports. While the system isn't perfect, it's still incredibly fun to play with. The music complements the action nicely, and though the narrative isn't groundbreaking, the sheer joy of causing mayhem makes Red Faction Guerrilla a memorable experience. Some people have compared Watch Dogs to a hacker's version of Grand Theft Auto, and while that comparison has some merit, Watch Dogs has enough going for it to stand on its own. The concept hooked me right from the start, being able to hack an entire city with just your phone. It feels like stepping into a hacker's dream, and the game pulls it off in clever ways. The story centers on Aiden Pierce, a vigilante hacker operating in a futuristic version of Chicago, where everything is interconnected through a central system called CTOS. From traffic lights to security cameras, you have control over it all. Watch Dogs was overshadowed by the massive hype before its release. Many expected it to be a groundbreaking, next-gen experience, and while it's a solid game, it didn't quite reach those towering expectations. The visuals, while decent, didn't match the jaw-dropping trailers that were shown ahead of launch, which left some fans disappointed. That said, I had a blast with the game, especially with the unique hacking mechanics. The ability to control the city around you made me feel like a genius hacker, manipulating traffic, disrupting enemies, and pulling off strategic moves with just a tap on the phone. It does a lot of things right, especially in terms of gameplay innovation and its open-world design, making it a fun and engaging experience overall. Mirror's Edge Catalyst takes the minimalist approach from the original game and expands on it beautifully. Instead of just the stark white rooftops with hints of color, you now get to explore vibrantly painted buildings, neon-lit environments, waterfalls, and a mix of unique shapes, all while staying true to the feel of the first Mirror's Edge. I am not sure, but I think Mirror's Edge Catalyst flew under the radar for a lot of people because there aren't massive shootouts or a deeply intricate storyline, and that might have turned some players off. Plus, it came out around the same time as other games that offered more in terms of content and variety, like Uncharted 4, Doom, and Dishonored 2, which left some players disappointed by the lack of depth. But for me, Catalyst shines precisely because of its focus. It knows exactly what it wants to be, an exhilarating experience centered on movement, and it absolutely nails that. It's definitely niche though, and not everyone is going to love a game that's 90% about running. Titanfall 2 might not need much of an introduction, but it's surprising how few people talk about it. This game is why I fell in love with fast-paced gameplay. It's fun, enjoyable, and most importantly, incredibly user-friendly. It felt like a perfect blend of Crysis and Mirror's Edge. When I first picked it up, I was expecting a decent shooter with some mech action, but what I got was a dynamic, fast-paced experience that combined fluid movement, exciting combat, and a surprisingly emotional story. Unfortunately, Titanfall 2 didn't get the recognition it deserved when it launched, largely due to poor timing. It was released between Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, two huge titles in the FPS space. As a result, it got overshadowed, and many players missed out on just how great it was. That's a real shame, because Titanfall 2 features one of the best single-player shooter campaigns I've ever played. The multiplayer is equally excellent, building on the fluid movement and mech combat from the first game with even more depth and customization. It's one of those games that has been appreciated more in hindsight, but at the time of launch, it didn't get nearly the attention it deserved. Quantum Break is an underrated masterpiece, and if you've played games like Alan Wake or Control, you know what to expect from Remedy. It's refreshing to see an AAA title that's purely focused on delivering a story-driven, single-player experience. What makes Quantum Break stand out is its unique blend of third-person action and a time-bending narrative that's part video game, part live-action show. The gameplay is solid, but it's the ambitious storytelling approach that truly sets it apart. Visually, the game is stunning, especially the way it plays with the concept of time fractures. The time waves and fractured light effects make Quantum Break one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen. Unfortunately, it didn't get the recognition it deserved, and part of that was because it was initially an Xbox exclusive, which limited its reach. Another issue was the live-action segments, which divided players. Some found them innovative, while others thought they disrupted the game's flow. On top of that, the PC version had some technical issues, with constant crashing that frustrated some players who were expecting a more straightforward action experience. But for those willing to give it a chance, Quantum Break delivers something different in a crowded genre. It's a shame it flew under the radar, especially since it was trying to push the boundaries of what a video game narrative could be. The Alien franchise has struggled to capture the terrifying atmosphere of the original movie in its video games, but Alien Isolation breaks that trend. It's hands down one of the most intense and atmospheric survival horror games I've ever played. In this game, your best friends are silence and the nearest table or locker. If that sounds like your kind of horror experience, you're in for a ride. Unlike typical run-and-gun games, Alien Isolation is all about survival, stealth, and staying calm while a deadly xenomorph hunts you through every inch of the spaceship. The slow pace and stealth-heavy gameplay might frustrate those looking for more action. You'll spend much of your time hiding in lockers, ducking under tables, and clutching your motion tracker, hoping the xenomorph didn't catch wind of you. The sound design is masterful, amplifying the fear at every turn, and the graphics are stellar, perfectly recreating the visual style of the original Alien film. Everything from the walls and doors to the smallest details like chairs and terminals looks just like it did in the movie. If you're a fan of the Alien series or love horror games, it's absolutely worth playing. Middle-earth: Shadow of War is the sequel to Shadow of Mordor, my favorite game of 2014, which set itself apart by blending Assassin's Creed and Batman Arkham-style third-person combat with the groundbreaking Nemesis system, creating unique orc enemies to battle. This sequel is essentially more of the same, but on a much grander scale. The story picks up where Shadow of Mordor left off, with the goal still being to defeat Sauron's forces. While the main story might not be the strongest part of the game, one thing that held Shadow of War back from getting the attention it deserved was the controversy surrounding its launch. The inclusion of microtransactions and loot boxes left a bad taste in a lot of players' mouths, and even though the developers eventually removed them, the damage to the game's reputation had already been done. Story-wise, while good, it didn't quite capture the same emotional highs as Shadow of Mordor, which left some players feeling less engaged. However, if you enjoy open-world games packed with action and a unique twist, Shadow of War delivers. The larger scale, intense combat, and the expanded Nemesis system offer a fun and dynamic experience. Even with its initial missteps, there's a lot here to enjoy. Mass Effect Andromeda had a lot to live up to as the next entry in the beloved Mass Effect series. It launched with a ton of hype, but when it failed to meet the sky-high expectations set by the original trilogy, it faced a lot of backlash. The engine was misused, development was a mess, and a buggy launch certainly didn't help matters. Even though most of those issues were patched up later, the damage to its reputation had already been done. However, underneath those initial problems, there's a solid sci-fi RPG that deserves more credit than it received. The combat is better than ever, with smooth and dynamic mechanics that are a clear step up from the previous games. Exploration in Andromeda feels fresh, giving you vast planets to discover. And while the story might not reach the emotional highs of the original trilogy, it's still engaging, if you give it a fair chance. Andromeda suffered from poor timing and the weight of expectations, but if you approach it without constantly comparing it to its predecessors, you'll find an enjoyable experience that has a lot to offer. Sunset Overdrive, a somewhat underrated gem from Insomniac, is a game I recently discovered, even though it's over 9 years old. This is a game that just wants you to have fun, and it delivers that in spades. While Sunset Overdrive might lack a compelling story or innovative quest design, that's not really the point of the game. Its offbeat humor and chaotic nature might not appeal to everyone. It's loud, goofy, and doesn't take itself seriously, which can be a turnoff for those seeking a more traditional or narrative-driven experience. But if you enjoy blowing stuff up while bouncing between cars, grinding rails, or ziplining on cables, all while shooting teddy bear-shaped rockets at weird energy drink zombie monsters, then Sunset Overdrive is a must-play. It's fast, fun, and unapologetically over the top, which makes it a refreshing change of pace from more serious open-world games. If you're in the mood for something wild, chaotic, and all about having a good time, this one's for you. The Order 1886 is a game that I went into knowing it had its share of criticism, but honestly, I really enjoyed my time with it. It's short, sure, and there's not much replay value, but what it does well, it does really well. If you like cinematic, story-driven games, this one will grab your attention, especially with its stunning visuals and unique setting. The game itself is a third-person cover shooter, kind of like Gears of War, but with a much heavier focus on the story. As for the gameplay, it's pretty standard cover-based shooting. You duck behind cover, pop out to shoot, and move from place to place. I think The Order 1886 gets a bad rap because people expected more from it, especially for a big-budget AAA game. It's a short experience. Like, I finished it in maybe 8 hours, and there's not much reason to go back once you're done. On top of that, a lot of people didn't like how it leaned so hard into the cinematic elements, with a ton of cutscenes and quick-time events. I get it, but if you go into it thinking of it more like an interactive movie with a really cool story and setting, it's a great ride. There aren't many games like it in terms of setting, and that's what drew me in. People might have skipped it because of the reviews, but I think it's worth a play, especially if you can get it at a low price. I hope you found something new to try, or maybe even rediscovered a game you've been meaning to play again. Of course, I couldn't cover all the amazing games out there, so if we missed any of your favorites, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to stay updated with all our gaming content. If you're still on the hunt for more recommendations, be sure to check out my other videos on the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.